Thank you for coming out to this afternoon session, this closing session. I hope the morning was a blessing to you, and if you were here last night, I hope that was a blessing to you. If you weren't here last night, it's all of one piece. This all fits together, and so if you just go to the sessions today, you're missing a major part to be able to understand all that I'm saying. And I would suggest you avail yourself of the recordings that your AV team is making. Well, let's get into it, and let's start with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you so much. What a wonderful church. What friendly people. What talented people. Lord, thank you so much for giving us a place to meet. Thank you so much for giving us signs of your soon coming. Lord, bless us, give us courage, open our eyes, and help us to receive your message, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so let's pick up where we left off. Friday night was pretty serious stuff. I mean, we went through the natural systems of the world, the consequence of sin, the unsustainability of a selfishness-based system, and the fact that the world is actually dying. I didn't say it on Friday night, but what we saw in the creation process was organization. What we're seeing now is disorganization of the earth. And human society is built on the earth. So that's a problem. That's a big problem. And we're seeing it now. But we ended up on a good, solid, optimistic note. Because what the Bible says, what Jesus said in the Bible, and he was talking to his disciples, and they had asked, what's going to go on? You know, tell us about the end times, or tell us about your coming of the kingdom. And actually in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21, those are parallel chapters. They're all telling the same story. But what happens is, after he tells his disciples what is going to happen in great detail at the end of time, in other words, where we are right now in the world, he gives them a very optimistic note. Now, when these things begin to happen, and that's right now, that's literally right now. We're seeing all the things that Christ said was going to happen and would accelerate, we're seeing right now. When these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near. It really only gets more difficult from here on out, unfortunately. I hate saying that message, but it gets more difficult to be a faithful Christian. It gets more difficult to lead anything resembling a normal life. On the other hand, our witnessing opportunities explode as long as we are modeling a Christ-like life. But the good news is, most of the marathon is behind us. It's not far to the finish line. This year, I'm doing an Ironman. And last year, my son and I rode our bicycles across the U.S. We started in Washington, went to Maine from coast to coast in the month of May. That was difficult. The Ironman is even more difficult, and I'm only doing it because I compete with my conference president, because he did an Ironman last year. And I really have cause for questioning this whole crazy thing. But an Ironman is a 2.2 mile swim, followed by a 112 mile bicycle ride, followed by a full marathon, which is 26.4 miles, I think. 26.2, anyway, 26.4, I think. And you have to do all of that in less than 15 and a half hours. So it's pretty challenging. And my boss, a great guy, Bob Cundiff, my conference president, he said, Scott, you wouldn't believe how difficult it gets right around mile 25. You've got just a little bit left of you. You've got the 112-mile bike ride, 2.2 mile swim. You've got 25 miles behind you. You've got just this little bit, and you just can't do it. It's really hard. The only reason I made it to the very end was that by the time, they start at like 6 in the morning, and now it's dark. It's getting close to midnight, and the finish line was so lit up, and he could hear the crowd cheering every person that crossed the line. He said, if I hadn't been able to know that the finish line was there and see the finish line, I never would have made it. And that's where we are now. Finish line is that close. These millennia of history are behind us. But we live in this time when that last little bit is really tough. And we have to hold on to Jesus with every step. Okay, so as I started off on Friday night, and as I fully laid out, today was really the day for the character matter. You know, it's all about the character of God and the character of Satan. And when the Bible talks about the sheep and the lambs, and the sheep and the goats, people separating, are you part of the loving kindness paradigm? Are you part of the selfishness paradigm? Are you a sheep? Are you a goat? And our hearts are diverging, and you can see it now. The hearts of the people of the world are diverging. Goats are becoming more goat-like. Sheep are becoming more sheep-like. We're separating. It is all about character and the fact that we, the children of God, have the character of Christ showing in them. And those who have fully embraced Satan's system have a coldness of heart, but also, they're just, they're comfortable in that system. That's what they want. They want to compete in that system. We're told some places in Spirit of Prophecy that people who are not children of God really wouldn't be happy in heaven. They wouldn't really like it. And when you stop and think about it, when you don't have a selfishness paradigm to operate in, but that's what you want, and that's what you're good at, and that's what you excel at, and all of a sudden you're living in this different system, you're not happy, A. B, you completely destroy it. So they won't be there. But anyway, it's all about character. It's all about the character of Satan. It's about the character of God. It's about the character of Satan. And it's about which character we have in us. It's all about character. And the character of Satan is increasingly seen in the earth and in the people of the earth. We're getting more and more and more clear. We've already seen clearly the character of God and the character of Christ. The character of Satan is being dramatically revealed, which helps us witness. It's fascinating. Right now, you talk to people, and there's this sense of understanding. It's hard to pin down. You talk to secularists, and they understand something huge is coming upon human society, something really big. And they listen to the preppers, the people who think that human society is about to collapse. And, is that it? And they listen to religions. They're looking, something huge is happening. You talk to various religions. You talk to people around the world, and there's this overwhelming sense that something really huge is about to happen. And in fact, it is, as this contest between systems plays out. So let's see, I covered this pretty well, I think. Selfishness, by its very nature, collapses in on itself. And we're going to look a little bit more at that in the systems of man, the things that man has put into place. Last night, it was how this plays out in nature, how the world itself is collapsing. Now it's going to be the systems of man. And it's mostly the collapse in the systems of man that people around the world have this palpable sense. That's what's happening. That's what's going to go on. So last night, we looked at global system decline. And this afternoon, we're going to look at resource depletion and complex society collapse. Briefly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. And we're going to look at some of the fulfillment of prophecy. We looked at that some last night. Tonight, we're going to look at some things that are the fulfillment of prophecy. And I think will help you knit all of this together into seeing how end-time events fit so neatly into what we've been talking about. And then I have some recommendations for what we should be doing at this point in human history. Okay, anyway, so man-made systems, man-made global systems, oil and money. Oil has given us more power than we've ever had before. We are gods with a lowercase g. In China, they are terraforming. That means they're taking an area the size of eastern Washington and completely changing the topography with the world's largest fleet of earth-moving machines. It's called the Loess Plateau, Loess, Loess Plateau. And the reason they're doing this is because for generations that area was overgrazed and became a desert. And then there's terrible winds there, and those winds picked up all that sand and carried it and dumped it on Beijing. And if you want to get the attention of the central government, you just keep dumping 3 inches of sand on Beijing, and you'll have their attention. And they got sick and tired of it, and they said, fine, that's it. We're going to totally restore this place. We're going to put valleys where there were no valleys. We're going to put mountains where there were no mountains. We're going to study the hydrology, where the water is under the soil. We're going to plant millions of trees, and they have. They've reformed and recreated this huge area, the Loess Plateau. Man can terraform. Man's technology, well, this is Seattle, I don't have to tell you about technology. I mean, we're pretty much self-sufficient, right? Who needs God? But because of the power that oil has given us, we have this amazing industrial and technological society. Without fossil fuels, we'd be very hard-pressed. And you can make the argument that someday we'll do that with renewable energy. We'll see. But we've got these centers of power, and we use them to glorify God, right? This is Hong Kong from Victoria Peak. This is pretty much ground central for mammonism, pretty much ground central for humanism, pretty much absolutely ground central for the pursuit of wealth. This is it. We lived in Hong Kong for 2 years, 3 years, for a few years we lived in Hong Kong. I didn't take that picture, but that's Hong Kong from Victoria Peak. And with all the power we have, we've used that to say we don't need God. We are like 2-year-olds. Well, let's make it a 4-year-old. We're like 4-year-olds behind the wheel of a car having just the most incredible joyride. We don't need anything. We can do this, we can do that. But you know that story does not end well. It crashes. People get hurt. That's what's going on. We have taken everything that we've got and used it to push God away. We've used it to insulate ourselves. Interestingly enough, as things get increasingly more disrupted and that insulation is stripped away, every human will have a moment when they are open to the urgings of the Holy Spirit, when they are seeing things maybe for the first time with some clarity. Every human will have a moment when the seeds we've planted, if we have planted them, have an opportunity to sprout. Right now, brothers and sisters, it seems like we're throwing seeds on rocky soil and nothing is happening at all. But there is a moment in the near future when those seeds can sprout. And like I said in the sermon, it comes down to our expectations. If we expect to be immediately thanked and have immediate gratification for witnessing for the Lord and for bearing out His character in this world, that fast reward does not come. But if we persevere, we will yield fruit. So anyway, we've pushed God aside, and we've used this oil-derived power to pursue the desires of our heart. My wife and I, when we dated, we had a very rapid courtship. We met in Mexico on a mission trip that I put together, and 2 weeks later we were setting the date. And I don't actually recommend that. Are there any young folks here? I don't recommend it. It turns out it worked fantastically well. She didn't have enough time to fully assess that I might not be what she wanted, and I got a great wife out of the deal. But we had an intense courtship. I mean, it wasn't just that we were phoning each other. Our waking hours were with each other for those 2 weeks. It was great. And at some point during the week, those 2 weeks where we're really getting to know each other, she asked me a question. She said, would you ever buy like a Ferrari? And now, come on, guys. Is that a gorgeous car? I mean, who wants the plane? Oh, my goodness. The plane is high maintenance, and so is that woman. But the car, that's a good-looking car. And I looked at her, and I said, yes, I would buy a Ferrari. And she had this look in her eyes like, oh, I thought I knew you. And I said, I would buy a Ferrari when no one in the world was hungry, when no one in the world was sick, when no one in the world was without shelter. Then I would buy a Ferrari. Okay, boom, home run. That was a good answer. But we we go to enormous lengths to glorify ourselves. Amen? That's what we use this for, is vanity. Vanity, as Solomon said. So here we are, and I switched gears a number of times. We just switched a gear. I switch gears as I try and rapidly go through some of these thoughts, getting us to some of the meat of this afternoon. In terms of resource depletion, we are in a great deal of trouble. Nations are competing, and they're competing for a number of things worldwide. They're competing for farmland. Huge competition for farmland because we've destroyed so much of our agricultural productivity all around the world. We talked about that last night. But they're competing for this. Who knows what that is? That's a good guess. Wow, you guys are great. That's wrong. It's dirt. That might be close. Does it help to know that this is Tanzania? I think this is Tanzania. If you were here last night, then you know that we've taken, around the world, we've taken living soil with hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of microorganisms in a handful, and we've put on so much pesticides and so much herbicides and so much chemical fertilizer that now there are no living organisms in there, and we have to keep on putting that stuff in order to produce. One of the things that we have to put on is phosphate rock. That's phosphate rock. And China used to produce a huge amount of phosphate rock, and then they stopped because they're looking at it and saying, wait a minute, we only have a very small amount of this on a global basis. The way we're using this, we've only got a little bit of time left, some 18 years of good, clean phosphate rock for the entire world. And then there's phosphate rock left, but it's slightly radioactive, and it's hard to get, and it's very expensive. So China said, we're going to buy phosphate rock, and then when everyone else is out, we will begin mining our phosphate rock again. Well, they're very smart. But this is phosphate rock, and we're running out of it. Now, last night, we looked at the fact that when we have spikes in food prices, that leads immediately to the destabilization of weak governance nations, and that leads to conflict, and that leads to disease and famine. We got all these problems. One of the fundamental things that we need, we have a very short supply of. And here's the thing. Here's with phosphate, and here's without. 95% reduction in productivity with this one chemical. We had agriculture, we had incredibly productive agriculture before we killed our soil. We had living soil where we had mushroom. Anyway, we had fungus, there we go. We had fungus filaments in the soil that were in a symbiotic relationship with the plants that would go, they'd find a little molecule of phosphate. We didn't need to saturate the soil. They would carry that phosphate particle along. They would deliver it to the plant. The plant would give them some sugar water. It was this great symbiotic relationship. We had very productive agriculture. And then we killed all that, all the microorganisms, all of the fungus in the soil, everything that worked together. Now we have to saturate the soil with phosphate to get the same job done. When we run out of phosphate that is not radioactive, what are we going to do? You've got 7.3 billion people who quickly begin fighting and getting sick and dying when food is not available. The moment of crisis is not beyond the horizon. It's actually pretty close. And nations stop being diplomatic when they are competing. When it gets really serious, the knives come out. That's the characteristic of the sinful world that we're in. So conflict, it's amazing right now. You talk to threat analysts, which I do, and they're saying, look, we've never seen so many pots boiling. We've never seen so many situations that are about to boil over, and we've never seen so much pre-conflict in all of our time of watching the world. Everywhere you go, There's a problem. And we're going to go into, at the end of this, we're going to go into Matthew 24, 6 through 8, and we're going to take it apart line by line, and we're going to look at what Christ said was coming and how we see that in the world today. But that's how it is with our resource pressures right now. Our financial system is terrible. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But here's the thing. We've spent down our cushion. Around the world, a number of nations are into deficit spending now. When nations face crises, we don't have a cushion anymore. We're not able to come up with a quick, easy response to major crises. In fact, the easiest thing to do when there's a big problem or when we really need something is to take it from someone else. And more, we're seeing nations that don't have the agricultural productivity or don't have the agricultural land or don't have the water or don't have the energy or don't have X looking over their neighbor's border and thinking, that's my next move. That's the easiest route, is just taking it. And there we see the selfishness paradigm fully expressed. So, complex society. You know, if you try and explain water to a fish, it's very difficult. Well, first of all, because fish don't talk much. But put yourself in the position of the fish for a while. If I'm trying to explain water to you, it's all around you, but how do I explain water to a fish, you know? How do I explain complex society to someone who absolutely lives in it and can't imagine a world without it, but doesn't know they live in it? We live in a complex society. Not only that, but we live in the world's first global complex society. We've never seen this before. So society is complex when people specialize and do one thing in order to earn their living and trade that skill for all the other things they need. The medium of exchange that we use for trading is money. But we specialize. I'm going to wager there isn't anyone here who grows all their own food, grows all their own fiber for their clothing, is completely self-sufficient in getting the materials and building their own dwelling, is completely sufficient when it comes to energy and power that they self-produce, provides all of their own medicine, provides, when needed, the mortuary services, gets nothing from anyone else. If there's anyone here like that, raise your hand. We live in a complex society, and here's what happens with complex societies. They become more complex. The level of complexity increases and increases. People specialize more and more. Education gets more and more and more advanced. People their understanding gets deeper as their area of operation gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And what always happens with complex societies throughout the recorded history of the world is that they go on with incredible success until they run out of something, until there is a critical failure in that complex society. And then, in the process of moving toward there, though, they also overextend themselves. The technical class necessary to maintain a complex society is really expensive. And modern nations get into deficit spending. Nations before that conquer and go out and try and get resources from outside to maintain that complex society. And then the whole thing tumbles down and collapses. There's a guy named Joseph Tainter, and there we go. The root cause of collapse of complex societies is a consistent overinvestment into complexity in an environment of declining marginal returns. So, very simple. You understood that, right? He wrote a book, and it's all like that. Actually, he wrote a PhD thesis, and then just turned it into a book, and it's almost inaccessible. But he has fantastic YouTube videos. Joseph Tainter. He'll be one of the guys that we're interviewing for this TV series that we're doing with ARTV. Amazing guy. But look, he has looked at the history of complex societies, and they go through these consistent, these predictable phases. You've got creation, you've got growth, you've got maturation, you've got pre-collapse, and you've got collapse. Our world complex society is right here hovering at the end of pre-collapse in comparison to every other complex society that has ever existed. All that's needed is a trigger mechanism. So when we read prophecy, when we read Revelation, when we read Spirit of Prophecy saying this is what it's going to be like, and we look at it and say, can't be. No way. I mean, how could that happen? No, we're an organized, we have we've got liberal democracy. We vote, and how could that possibly happen? We're very, very close to that possibly happening, and you'll see some of it. I'll go in a little bit deeper. Maybe it comes pretty quick here. All that's lacking is a trigger, and the thing is, the world is full of triggers. The threat analysts who work with governments, well, the ones I talk to work with the United States government. Those are the only ones I talk to because they're available. But they're looking at this and they're seeing nothing but fields and fields of threats all over the world. Significant threats for tremendous conflict. And, what's going to tip it off? Is it going to be more food price spikes? Is it going to be limited access to water? Is it going to be strong-arm governments, which are always more friendly to conflict and acquisition of resources through war? What's it going to be? But all of these things exist right now, and all of them are at the crisis point. Last night we looked at the exponential increase in disasters. So we're seeing this. This is absolutely astonishing. What we haven't seen, and what I will talk about, is an increase in geophysical events, an increase in earthquakes. But I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to make a prediction about earthquakes today, but not right now. This is a great chart, and as you can see, it's time of the end, and we've got a timeline here, and you can see it's not to scale because over here this says eternity, and this is less than eternity, so that's not quite to scale. But here we are. We've got from 1798, from 1844, we've got the midnight cry, second angel's messages. We've got 1888 right here. Between 1888, we've got then the next thing is the shaking time. I think we're almost there. We might have begun to enter the shaking time. Then we've got the Sunday law and the time of little trouble. And as we go on a little bit, as we talk about the fulfillment of prophecy over the next few minutes, I want you to remember this Sunday law, and I want you to remember this time of little trouble, time of Jacob's trouble, it's called in some places. Because this is where we are, as far as I can tell, in time. And then we've got the loud cry and the latter rain, where people really wake up, including us. And then you've got the close of probation. All of these things are rushing at us headlong. Laudato Si, who knows what that is? Okay, well, yeah, you read my blog, so. Laudato Si. This was published in 2015. There we go. So this is the Pope's encyclical. It's a very unique encyclical. It was addressed, usually the encyclicals, and encyclical means to be circulated, okay? That's a loose translation. But this is a message that's supposed to go around. It's a message that's really supposed to go from the leaders of the church to the people of the church. This encyclical was addressed to all of mankind. And the Pope did a fantastic job. If you were here last night, he's talking about the accelerating decline in our natural world. What's going on with our hydrosphere? What's going on with our oceanic system? What's going on with our freshwater system? What's going on with our industrial agricultural system, our soil system, really? What's going on with our climate? What's going on with our cryosphere? All of these things, how it impacts humanity. It sounds like I wrote the first half, or people that and if you've read my book, Planet in Distress, you'd say, yeah, Scott wrote the first half of Laudato Si. Or people that I really listen to, people that I respect, helped write the first half of Laudato Si. I certainly didn't write the second half. But he does this fantastic job of describing how the natural world is collapsing. He doesn't come at it with any of the great controversy framing that I do. That's completely absent. But from a technical standpoint, he does a really good job analyzing the problem. And then he also does an excellent job, and I respect, as a former ADRA country director, I really respect this. He does an excellent job saying, and here how this is impacting vulnerable people. He does a fantastic job. Then he goes on. And what he does is, I do all of this analysis, and then I suggest, okay, so therefore, we need God more than ever. And this is the Pope. You have a right to expect something similar, but what he does is he suggests we need an excellent technocratic approach to solving the Earth's problems. The fact we've got a collapsing natural systems. We need to change the way we do industrial agriculture. We need to change the way we do technology. We need to change the way we do industry. We need to change the way we do finance. We need to change the way that we relate to each other as humans so that we have more equality. And the thing is, there isn't a system in place to really do this, so we kind of need a global government. Okay? And not only that, but he suggests that the ultimate solution is a spiritual one. He finally gets to the spiritual stuff. And what he basically says is, in order to heal the earth and in order to heal relationships between people, everyone needs to celebrate the Eucharist on Sunday. Yes, it's in print. It's a stated, I wouldn't quite call it policy, but it's an encyclical. And I was so stunned that we didn't hear anything about it in the Adventist world. I wrote an article for Adventist Review that was published, and really? I'm the only one shouting about this? Really? But here we are. You want to talk about the fulfillment of prophecy? We have a pope calling for world government. We have a pope saying, in order to deal with the crisis that is descending on mankind, we need a Sunday-based response. Nobody really listened. The world at large didn't listen, but then the world at large doesn't really acknowledge that we are entering a profound state of crises. When we do enter a profound state of crises, all we need is one miracle for the whole world to say, okay, right, follow him. This is how we're going to do it. Eucharist, no problem. Sunday, no problem. But then we've got, while this is going on, we've got a statement from a writer named Ellen White that she made in 1904. Men in responsible positions will not only ignore and despise the Sabbath themselves, but from the sacred desk will urge upon the people the observance of the first day of the week, pleading tradition and customs in behalf of this man-made institution. They will point to the calamities on land and sea, to the storms of wind, the flood, the earthquakes, the destruction by fire, as judgments indicating God's displeasure because Sunday is not sacredly observed. Those calamities will increase more and more. One disaster will follow upon the heels of another, and those who make void the law of God will point to the few who are keeping the Sabbath of the fourth commandment as the ones who are bringing wrath upon the world. Is it beginning to come together for you? We are on the verge of crises. We are, all of humanity is waking up and beginning to understand we've got a huge problem, though they don't quite understand it yet. We have seen a tripling of disasters in the last 30 years, and that is accelerating. We'll see more than a tripling in an equal period of time if the earth lasts that long. We are seeing destabilization everywhere. The Pope has said this problem is solved by celebrating the Eucharist on Sunday. And we need a world authority making sure that we have a technocratic solution as well. Is it falling into place for you? This is what we're seeing in real time, and it's absolutely astonishing. Right now, 1 in 6 people in the United States think that we would be better off under military rule than our current political system. That is an astonishing 250% increase in the last decade. And the figures are higher among millennials. They're like, don't talk to me about politics, man. Just let the army do it. This is ridiculous. All around the world, we're having more and more of a veering toward authoritarian governments and an acceptance, a willingness. Yeah, okay, I'm tired of these people arguing. Democracy is like overrated. Let's go in that direction. Let's try that. All around the world. Now, at the National Prayer Breakfast on February the 2nd, our president got up, and it was actually Chaplain Barry Black, an Adventist, who spoke. The president got up after Barry Black and had a number of remarks. The one I'm pulling out of that is him saying, I'm going to absolutely demolish the Johnson Amendment. So what's the Johnson Amendment? It's named for Lyndon Johnson. He did it in 1954 when he was a senator, and it basically says, okay, if you're a church and you're a nonprofit organization, good for you. To remain a nonprofit organization, to have your tax status, you can't be involved in politics. You can't get up and preach about politics. You can't say, that's our candidate. You can't sponsor legislation. It is the New York Times describes it as the brightest line in the separation of church and state. Right after he spoke, immediately after he spoke, legislation was introduced to get rid of the Johnson Amendment. We are seeing, as predicted, a narrowing of the gap, hands being extended across the chasm. We are seeing the erosion of the separation of church and state. All of these things, all of these threats from a multitude of different directions are coming upon us simultaneously. It's going to be more difficult to witness tomorrow than it is today. It's going to be more difficult to witness the day after tomorrow than it is tomorrow. The strategy of waiting for a good time has become a tragically failing one. As imperfect as we are, as unready as we are, as unwilling as we are, we either witness and get good at witnessing because we start witnessing and start that growth. We either witness or we don't. And if we don't, we have to explain that in front of God without anyone having our back. It was difficult. It was difficult. You had a house, you had a car, you had a job, you had food, you had all these blessings I gave you, and you didn't tell the people around you that this was all coming to an end. Well, they didn't really want to hear. I don't think they wanted to hear. It didn't come up. They never asked me. I mean, I don't know. I'd rather do it than try and come up with an excuse because it's not good. Anyway, so we're seeing erosions like this. We're seeing the fulfillment of prophecy all around the world. Prophecies in Matthew 24, 6 through 8, which we're going to go through in detail and which I heavily referenced last night. Those are being fulfilled. Prophecies in Matthew 25, 1 through 13. The virgins who are sleeping. That's fulfilled. We're a sleepy Laodicean church. All of this, the framework for the Sunday law, human society becoming more and more and more destabilized. So, Matthew 24, 6 through 8. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. So what this means is we're going to hear about actual fighting. But we're also going to be hearing about potential fighting all the time. We're going to hear about conflict in places. And also going to be hearing about potential conflict. That describes right now. We're hearing about this a lot. Ukraine, if you want to pick one out. Middle East, Africa, all over Africa. Africa is astonishing right now. Certainly northern Africa. But we're seeing this right now. This is being fulfilled right in front of our eyes, and it's only increasing. So you hear of conflict and potential conflict. We're going to see the signs, but they're not going to be. The world is going to see the signs, but it's not going to be clear. For those who understand, see that ye be not troubled, for these things must come to pass. So if you understand the contest between the loving kindness paradigm and the selfishness paradigm, then you understand, so we're talking about the great controversy here, you understand that Satan's system must be proven in front of the entire universe to be a complete and total irredeemable fraud. And then the end will come. Satan has to be left with no leg to stand on. But it would have worked if you hadn't ended time, God. No, he can't be able to say that. It has to be such a complete and total disaster that sin will never happen again in the history of the universe ever, period. See that you are not troubled. Don't take your eye off the ball. Don't get caught up in events which are only going to get more troubling and only going to get more horrific and only going to get more heartbreaking. Don't take your eye off the ball because this has to happen. We have to go through this. But the end is not yet. No, the end is not yet. We've got the shaking, we've got the Sunday law, we've got the time of little trouble, we've got the close of probation. And it's interesting, you look at that close of probation right on that graph. Everything that happens before the close of probation, what we're seeing is the consequence of Satan's system. After the close of probation, we're seeing the consequence of Satan's system, and it just getting worse and worse and worse, and the accelerating of events is terrible. Plus, we're seeing the pouring out of plagues. We're seeing God's wrath being poured out. Both of those at the same time. So yeah, the end is not yet. The close of probation, the pouring out of plagues, the final persecution, the end. There's a lot to happen. Fortunately, it happens quickly. Nation shall rise against nation. Okay, a nation is some place that has, it's a thing that has a place. It's got territory and it's got a flag. State will rise against state, but then you've also got kingdom against kingdom. You've got people groups. You've got the Turks versus the Kurds, a very, very active conflict. You've got the Arabic community against the Jews. You've got the Tutsis against the Hutus. All around the world, you've got people group against people group. Certainly that's true in Central America. Certainly it's true in some parts of America. Especially as racism rears its ugly head. But here we're talking about open conflict. Nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and that's not mutually exclusive, by the way. You can have both of those going on at the same time, which is what we're seeing in the Middle East, which is absolutely unfigure-outable. That just became a word, by the way. You can look it up. Give me a few minutes and we'll have a Wikipedia entry on it. Unfigure-outable. There shall be famines. That's very clear. And the United Nations, I think it was the Food and Agriculture Organization, or it was the High Council on Refugees. Anyway, the United Nations announced, it was either Thursday or yesterday, that we've never seen in modern history this many people on the verge of starvation in so many places around the world. I mean, we've got a full-blown humanitarian crisis. They're going in the next couple weeks. They're going to try and raise $4 billion. But we're talking in the tens of millions of people that are on the verge of starvation. And of course, once you get hunger, or if you also get lack of water, you immediately get disease. But once you have hunger, you also have more conflict. All of these things go together. So we're going to have famines. We're seeing that now in incredible amount. And as the earth environment becomes more and more hostile, which is what we're seeing, our ability to produce food becomes less and less and less. We're going to see more and more and more of this. It's just how it works with Satan's systems winding down. We'll see pestilences, we'll see disease. Now, is that diseases we've never seen before, or is it diseases we've seen but thought we had overcome, or is it diseases that we've always had but are becoming much more prevalent? And my answer is yes. Yeah, all of the above, D. So pestilences, and we're seeing all of that now. And interestingly enough, I would point to Syria. Syria is a country that experienced a profound drought for several years, so that people were absolutely desperate. And then it went into, and that drought was from changes in our atmospheric patterns, so an accelerating decline in the world. And then people were entirely desperate. The farmers had sold everything they had. They were starving. They started rebelling against the government. They got nothing. The government put them up against the wall and shot them. Syria went into civil war. Other parties came in. got very complicated. We've seen millions of people flee Syria. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people dead. There's no end there. And now we're seeing diseases that are absolutely astonishing. Polio is resurging from Syria. The tuberculosis, the medicine-resistant, antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis is astonishing. That's coming out of Syria. So many diseases coming out of Syria. And Syria is just the model for how this works. It's not an isolated case. It's what we can expect more and more and more of. And the question is, are we evangelizing them? Are we evangelizing everywhere that we can? Because you can't really evangelize in Syria right now. Number one, they'll shoot you, which will end your ministry real quickly. But who's going to pay attention? I mean, they're in this incredible crisis. And it's getting worse around the world, especially in Africa. Those of you who were here last night, we looked at the graph, the map from 2013, countries that were insecure in their food. And the countries that were insecure in their food in 2013 are at war, most of them, in 2016. We're at the point as human society where we can see it coming. We can see the fulfillment of prophecy coming years in advance. But we're not to the point as a church where we can say, this is where we really got to be waging all-out spiritual war before it's too late in these points. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. There we go. Earthquakes in diverse places. The missing link. The missing link. We're seeing an increase in earthquakes, especially earthquakes that are above, well, not especially, but earthquakes that are above 5.0 in magnitude. We're seeing an increase, but it's not along the lines of all these other categories. It's this gradual increase. But there's a guy, I forget his name. He wrote a book called Waking the Giant, and it was a scientific theory that was a bit of an outlier when he came up with it, but it's since become, in just a few years, it's become pretty much mainstream science. And he said, look, when we change the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, in other words, when we heat the planet up by just a little bit, then there's more water in the atmosphere, and that changes the pressure on the Earth's crust. And when we melt the ice at the poles and sea levels rise, that changes the pressure on the crust. And when we extract massive amounts of fluid out of the Earth's crust, whether that's oil or water, that changes the pressure on the Earth's crust. And what we're seeing is the setting up for massive earthquakes as these dynamics continue to increase. You'd think it's just a little thing, but there's volcanoes around the world that erupt, not all of them, but there's some volcanoes around the world that erupt when you have what's called a king tide, a massive tide. These changes that aren't really astonishingly big and yet end up in geological activity. And so in addition to that, the author of this book, I wish I could remember his name, says, look, what? Sorry? No, Waking the Giant. I want to say Bill McKibben, but yeah, there you go, McGuire. Yeah, and he's a volcanologist from the UK. The book is 80% evolution, and it's $35. So you can spend your $35, or you can listen to the summary of the $35 that I spent. But anyway, it's up to you. But he says, look, there was this astonishing earthquake in the middle of the Pacific where there should have not been an earthquake. And what we're seeing is the beginnings of that plate, that tectonic plate, beginning to fold. And as that plate begins to fold, then we're going to see amazing geologic activity. It's going to take 20,000 years, but don't worry. What it was basically saying is every mountain and every island is going to be reorganized all around the world because all the plates are going to reorganize. And I'm thinking, Bill, right? Yeah, Bill McGuire. Bill, Dr. Bill, you might be right. I don't think it's going to take 20,000 years. This is the missing link. And I predict, just based on my observation of everything else that's going on, that I'll go out on a limb. Within the next 5 years, we'll see the missing link drop into place. Significant earthquake activity. Let's see if we're right, if I'm right. So all this stuff is happening, and it's scary. we're very comfortable in the selfishness paradigm. We're very comfortable having one foot in one world and one foot in the other world. And we have good lives, and we eat well, and things are going along. And this is very disruptive. It's scary. But it's real. And what are we going to do? I have some suggestions. First and foremost, develop and deepen a personal relationship with Christ. Get to know him as a friend. Get to know him as a friend, the kind of friend who's coming you really anticipate. I mean, you know how it is. You've got a friend coming from so-and-so. Oh, they're going to be here in 2 weeks. It's going to be so much fun. Get to know Christ, not as a scary God, not as a figure in the Bible, not as a mystery, of spiritual mystery. Get to know him as a friend. And the interesting thing is that's how he wants to know you. That's how he wants to know you. He wants to be your friend. And what we do with friends is when we have a problem, we go to them with the expectation that they will be sympathetic and helpful. And this is the expectation we should have with Christ, that not only sympathetic and helpful, but also amazing guidance. Jesus, what am I going to do? We should go expecting an answer. And we should go to him as we go to a friend. Study the Bible and store it up in our hearts. What kind of friendship relationship is it where we don't read their letters? Develop a vigorous prayer life. What kind of a friendship is it where we're not talking to them? And familiarize yourself with prophecy and end-time events. What kind of a friendship is it when you're not bothering to figure out when your friend is coming? It's all about having a friendship relationship with Christ and doing the things that support and deepen that friendship. And with that friendship comes the evaporation of anxiety, the evaporation of uncertainty, a settling into calmness. Yeah, this is a horrible time. But Christ himself, our friend, said, "Look up, lift up your head, for your redemption draweth nigh." The finish line is close. And when you run the Ironman and you're coming up to the finish line and you've got to cross it before midnight, it's glowing. And that's what you're headed for. And that's where we are. And our friend is running that last mile with us, bearing us up and guiding our footsteps. Scary, but he's right there. He's right there. Prepare your family. Decrease your dependency on the world. That is intentionally vague because it varies from family to family. I'm not suggesting a garage full of food and high caliber weaponry, okay? That's not here. That's not decreasing our dependency on the world. That's preparing that's preparing to take lives. What I am suggesting is that we turn away from the world to the maximum degree possible and that we turn toward Christ. And again, that's vague, but it depends on each situation. Withdrawing from the influences of the world is absolutely part of it. Part of the selfishness paradigm is I'm going to say envy, but what I'm really thinking of is, what's that word where you want? Covet. Thank you, covetousness. We need to get away from commercialized covetousness. We need to get away from the world influences that tell us you'll be a better person, or you'll be a happier person, or you'll be a whole person if you have what they've got. That's one of the influences we need to get away from. And we need to settle into the loving kindness paradigm, settle into being a blessing to others. We need to stop being dissatisfied and stop chasing a mirage and start pursuing Christ wholeheartedly and try and be like him. Otherwise, we're just running with the herd and they're going off a cliff, so that's not good. Get out of debt. When you go into a world of significant disruption and you hold significant debt, it's the housing crisis that we had, 2007 to 2009, that's just a drop in the bucket when it comes to disruption of society. And you saw what happened to people whose mortgages were underwater. You couldn't get out of them. A lot of people walked away. I don't think in the future you'll be able to just walk away. I think you'll be held to account. You want to be out of debt so that you have freedom to continue your ministry and continue your life in a world that is increasingly more difficult. Raise more of your own food and spend more time out in the garden. Now, Ellen White absolutely counseled that we raise as much of our own food as we reasonably could. But she didn't say, do this as a survival strategy. Read her writings, and she said, spending time outside is healthy, and you commune with God more easily when you do that. And that's the basis of my advice, too. If we enter into the time that's immediately ahead of us, the time that is descending upon us now, if we enter into it with a bunker mentality or a survivalist mentality, it's not going to be good for us. If we enter into it in the spirit, my friend Jesus is taking care of me, I'm following his advice, that's part of it, but I'm not going to worry. I'm going to try and be a blessing to others. I'm going to try and witness for him. Here we go. Hold my hand, Jesus. That's very different from a bunker mentality or survivalist mentality that you see so much in the world. What to do to prepare your neighbors and friends. So here's the thing. Be part of the loving kindness paradigm. Have Jesus so in you that people can see him there. And that starts back at the first step. Get to know Jesus as a friend. Hold up friends and neighbors in prayer and ask God to create opportunities for you to witness. Now, you notice the first thing on the list isn't go knock on the door and put a Bible study right under their nose. It's not. Go work on yourself. Go work on your own relationship, and then hold up others in prayer, and then give of yourself. You can't just show up and say, hey, world's coming to an end. Here's a brochure. Oh, that doesn't work at all. No, you got to be a real person. Each of us has our social network, and if they can see Christ in us, they're going to come to us more often than not, especially as these questions come up in human society and we get into deep problems. They'll be looking to us, but if they can't see Christ in us, they won't. They won't. Hey, you don't have any answers. What do you know? Give yourself and interact frequently so you've got a basis of socialization for the future. Have a store of books and articles. You can tell I'm a writer. Have a store of books and articles that you've read and that you have on hand. If when it comes to giving of yourself and interacting frequently, hey neighbor, you're painting your garage. You got another paintbrush? Hey, I'm coming over. And you get into a conversation and you find out that this neighbor of yours is actually very interesting. You also find out that his brother was just diagnosed with diabetes. Oh, you know what? There's this program called the CHIP program, and it actually reverses diabetes. Not in every case, but it's this diet-based thing. It's absolutely amazing. Science-based medicine is really cool. I got an article on it. I'm going to go get it and give it to you. And then further down the line, hey, neighbor, tell me about your brother. You know what? I've been lifting him up in prayer. How's he doing? Is he interested in that CHIP program? Because there's some of our churches that give them. I can find out where some are. So, he's interested in it. Yeah, I'm going to keep holding him up in prayer. So your neighbor knows you're a real person. Your neighbor knows you pray. Your neighbor knows you care. You've planted so many seeds that when the Spirit speaks, that neighbor will come to you, and you can plant more, and you can lead them to Christ. And you didn't shove a brochure under anybody's nose. You're just being the wonderful, kind person with Christ glowing out of you that you are. So, a ministry for everyone. Everybody here has a talent. There isn't anybody here who does not have the basis for ministry. When I lived in Mongolia, I was the director of ADRA in Mongolia. We were there for 5 years. When I lived in Mongolia, the country, it's a long story, so I won't tell you nearly the whole thing. The country had thousands of street children. The country had collapsed, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the Soviet Union subsidized 85% of the Mongolian GNP. And in Mongolia, it was the fathers who led the household. It was the fathers who were given the vouchers to buy the apartment, to buy the food, to buy the vodka, which is very important, to buy the clothing, to buy whatever. So the man was the head. You got to have the man, and the man got the vouchers, and the women got a little medal. If they had more than 3 children, they got a champion mother medal because it was a pro-natal country. They wanted their people to have kids. When the Soviet Union collapsed, all the vouchers stopped. And there wasn't really any industry because the nobody really worked. It was a totally dysfunctional thing. They weren't actually producing. They just had these jobs they went to, and they didn't do much. And what happened was men were getting more vouchers based on the size of their family. They would get more vodka, more clothing. They would have a better life if they had more kids. Kids were an asset. And boom, kids were a liability. As soon as kids became a liability, tens of thousands of fathers melted away, just disappeared. And women are left with these kids, and they're desperate. And the cultural understanding is, the long-grained understanding is, they need a man. The man is security. In Mongolia, if you're living together, you're married. If you're not living together, you're not married. That's marriage. And so women would go looking for a man. And things being things, they would find one sometimes, fairly often. And what happened thousands of times, not just once, thousands of times in Mongolia, is that the man would say, yeah, come on into my ger. You're my gergi now. You're my wife now. The woman comes into the ger, and the man says, whoa, wait a minute. Hold, kids, what are you doing? Going with our mommy. No. Go find your dad. And the woman would watch her children turned onto the street in a starving country that is the coldest capital city in the world, 45 degrees below zero. So these kids are dying. Those that are living are barely making it. I saw street children attacked and their clothing taken off so that parents could give their own children the clothing that had been on street children. That's how active the devil was in Mongolia. That's the heart grown cold, and it's all over the world. It's not just Mongolia. It's just amazing what's going on in this horrible, sick world. I'm making a small point with a long story. I'm sorry, but this is it, man. This is reality. And so these kids were living in the steam tunnels underneath the city. The city is heated by 3 big power plants, and there's no thermostats everywhere. The steam tunnels go, and it delivers steam to your apartment, and you're either too hot or too cold or somewhere in between. And there's these hundreds of miles of steam tunnels under the city, and the kids are living under there, and they've got open sores all over, and they're starving. And we had a ministry in Adra. We were told, if you do anything to help the street kids, we're going to throw you out of the country. They didn't want us to do anything. Because if you help street kids, then there'll be more street kids. Because the kids that are starving at home are going to realize that all they have to do is leave and you'll feed them. But you can't look at those kids and not in the face and not do anything. You can't. And if I ever come back, I'll tell you an amazing story about how God worked to change things in Mongolia using a runaway criminal and the FBI. It is, and I don't like to preach it because I always cry. So, all right, that's true, I got the tissue. Anyway, the point of all this, I'll tell you what, I got time between now and when I go to the airport, so I'm going to finish this, and if you want to hear the story, I'm going to stay and tell it to whoever stays. Okay, is that okay? Yeah, okay. So, I've practically told it already. So, the thing is, God worked miracles, and we were able to hand out power bars to the street kids legally, astonishingly. And we were also able to hand out quilts that had been hand-sewn by elderly women in the U.S. And this huge story, and my point is, if you have shaking hands and can guide a needle through fabric, if you saw the looks on the faces of those street kids, I mean, this is an amazing ministry these women were engaged in. Some of them in nursing homes, many of them in nursing homes, and they'd make these quilts and they'd send them to Adra, and we'd hand them out, and they transformed the lives of these kids. We were able to do that and a whole lot more in that very sick nation while I was there. What is your talent? These women working in nursing homes were doing an amazing thing for God. What is your talent? Here's the thing. Ask your friend Jesus to guide you to your talent. And here's another thing. Working for Jesus is not a scary thing. Your talent that has been given you should be a joy to express. Working for God should be incredibly fulfilling, not scary. and incredibly rewarding. What is it? Are you really good at healthcare? By that I mean health education. We're doing some fascinating health work in the Northern New England Conference, one of the projects that I've been involved in. We have a healing project. We found that in Northern New England, we've got the fattest, whitest conference and one of the oldest conferences in the U.S. And these people just aren't interested in changing their diet. They're not interested in, none of that. I'm just going to die, no problem. But you know what? I can barely, this knee, my joints hurt so much, I can barely move. I'd love to get the pain gone. Well, that's the entry point. We're doing what basically amounts to teaching hydrotherapy. We're getting people in. Let us show you how to heal. Let us show you how to address these symptoms. And it's amazing. You get someone swaddled in blankets with a cold towel on their forehead and really hot water on their feet, and you're massaging their feet and pouring the hot water in. And this is a community member who's never been in an Adventist church before. And you're talking with them and you're forming a relationship. By the time this 6-week healing project is done and people's lives have been fundamentally changed, their friends are in the Adventist church. And is this, if you're paying attention to healthcare and all of that, and if you're paying attention to that, then you may have a feeling that healthcare may get more difficult and expensive in the future. There was never a time like now for lovingly expressing some of the natural therapies that are given to us in Spirit of Prophecy. There's never a time to revisit our health roots in the Adventist church like now. Did God give you a burden for that? You've got a beautiful fellowship hall over there. Is that your talent? How about the fact that food is getting more difficult? How about showing people that have a little bit of land how to garden? It's incredible how intimidating it is to learn how to garden. It's incredible how bad you can be at it. We've got people who have a rototiller ministry. I can't do anything for God. Really? Have you got a rototiller? Because there's churches that have gardening projects, and they get to spend an hour each week with a family with their hands in the dirt. Wow. And they really get to form relationships. And to get that garden started, some crotchety old guy from the church had to show up with his pickup and rototill the ground, and that's his ministry, a rototiller ministry. There isn't anybody here who can't have a really rewarding ministry, and your friend Jesus will guide you to it if you ask him to and if you open yourself. Rewarding, fun even. Increased questioning, a hunger for answers. I've got a blog that I should post 2 more. Well, anyway, I'm doing so much now, but I've got this blog, and I've got about 100 blog posts on it that are basically the follow-up to my book, Planted in Distress. And I get a number of visitors every day from all around the world. And I see the articles they go to. I see the Bible texts they click on. I see the articles that they click on. I give a Bible study to someone in the Middle East practically every day from work that I did 2 years ago. There's a hunger all around the world for answers and for information. And if you've got $20 a year, you can have a blog. You can be putting information on there. You can be guiding people to Jesus. If you're the introvert type and you just, like, nothing else works, and like, no, I can't do any of that stuff, well, you can do this. You can be on your computer. And people are searching for anything that's on the internet. They're trying to figure things out. There are rising troubles all over the world. Is it your gift to embrace and to comfort? Is it your gift to guide and counsel? That we're getting more opportunities for all of that, not less. Cyclical evangelism. And so in January, a bit to my surprise, I became the director of evangelism for my conference, which, that's a big change. And one of the things I'm really telling our churches is you've got to do cyclical evangelism. You've got to always have something going and always be reaching out to the community, but you also have to have a plan. We're going to do this healing project, and then we're going to do a healthy cooking project, and then we're going to work in the community, and we're going to do these things, and we're going to have our food bank, and then we're going to have our reaping event, a short series of meetings. We've got this plan. And then we're going to do the whole thing all over again. You've got to be very intentional so that there's a pathway to Christ and a pathway to maturing in a relationship with Christ in your church. There's so many opportunities for evangelism training, and I've got to think that the Washington Conference is as much a leader as any other. And then finally, pray unceasingly for the Holy Spirit to be poured out. All of those things, I don't think I told you anything you didn't at least have a sense of. But what we need, brothers and sisters, is to be intentional and to be systematic and to be faith-centered in what we do. Because the seed that we're throwing on stony ground now, that ground will soon have the watering of the latter rain and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And that seed, even though it's very unfulfilling to do this now, if we are persistent in planting seed, it will sprout. And it will be nourished through Christ. So that's it, man. Sin is destroying the world. Our global complex society is on the verge of collapse. The basis of our lives is being eroded out from under us, at least those of us who live for the world. Prophecy is being fulfilled in real time. We can actually chart it and graph it in real time. Not only that, we can look ahead and say, that's where the problem is going to be next. That's the world we live in right now. All of those events interact seamlessly with Matthew 24 and Great Controversy, chapter 36. We're living in this time. And Christ really is coming, and he really is coming soon. And that's the reality of it. That is where we're at in human history. And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me, to give every man according as his work shall be. There is this sense that we are very much expected to be about our Master's business. Our reward is commensurate with our work. That's the end of the series. I will stay and tell my Mongolian story, maybe even two. But what I'd like to do is end now in small group prayer, 2, 3, or 4, praying for this church, praying for the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, praying for faith and strength and a close relationship in Christ. If you would just gather together, I'm going to take off the mic and I'm going to join with a couple others, and let's fill this sanctuary with the sound of prayer.